I'm very conscious that we're a little bit behind time. So if we could, everybody sit down and start to settle down for what I imagine will be a really interesting and exciting conversation. It goes to the heart of who we are and why we're here, because it's all about parliamentary and democratic oversight in artificial intelligence, so policy and legislative approaches. So thanks everybody. I hope everybody's had enough coffee and cake to get them through the next hour, and then on to, I believe you're going to Speaker's House for something that sounds rather lovely. Speaker's House is pretty impressive, so I hope you all have a lovely time. I just wanted to, I'll introduce myself. I am Dan Aldridge. I am the Member of Parliament for Weston-super-Mare. I'm also, hey, hi Joanna, how are you doing? You've knocked me off my train of thought now. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Who am I? Right, that's where we were. So I'm also a member of the parliamentary delegate to the Council of Europe, where I have met many of you before, many of you wonderful people, and heard lots of you speak on topics like this. And we know that this is an issue of humanity. This isn't just an issue of national sovereignty. It isn't just an issue that we're talking about in isolation. It's something that we very much have to have cross-border conversations. Myself and the Deputy Speaker Nuzgani and Dawn Butler and others were in Kuala Lumpur 2 weeks ago and Sarah at an Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and Interparliamentary Union conference on artificial intelligence. And what really struck me was the global kind of disparity at the pace and scale that we have, the disparity of pace and scale that we have across the world, and also within Europe, but genuinely across the world. It reminded me of how privileged in many ways the UK is to be far ahead in certain areas, but we still have a lot to learn from others. Where we all are, at the different stages we're at, it presents us with significant challenges and opportunities. And one of the things that I took away from that conference in Kuala Lumpur was very much a need for us to go away from things like this with solid actions and the connections between ourselves, so that we know if a piece of legislation is being proposed in our countries, that we have somebody within Europe or somebody in another part of the world that we can talk to and say, well, how are you doing it? How are you planning to deploy it? And how is it working there? Because this is a global project, and it really is important that we do that. So I'm going to stop talking, because you're not here to really listen to me. You're here to listen to this wonderful panel that we have, that the Secretariat have assembled. Rather than me introduce people, because I always feel like I don't really like to do that. I feel like it's you're best to get this from the, I'm not calling you horses, but in the UK we say the horse's mouth, which means from the individual. So a British idiom there. So if I go from right to left, if I start off with Federica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Federica Onori. I'm a member of the Italian Parliament. I am Special Representative for Artificial Intelligence in the OSCE-PA. So I have the honor to represent the position of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in this situation.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Hi everyone, my name's Venus Ali. I'm Deputy Executive Director at the Startup Coalition. So the Startup Coalition represents startups and scale-ups in the UK. We also sit on the board for Allied for Startups in the EU, as well as members of the European Startup Network, which joins sort of startup associations right across Europe. We have about 4,000 founders, investors, and other sort of startup ecosystem folk within our community. And so, as you can imagine, are spread right across the economy. So while I probably will talk mainly about the UK, I'll try and situate that in a wider global context.
Thank you. My name is Martin Wrigley. I'm the MP for Newton Abbot, which is down in Devon, about 50 miles south of Dan, something like that. Not far away. Part of the West Country. You might remember my town of Dawlish, with the railway line hanging over the sea a few years ago. I have a background in technology. I was trained as an electrical and electronic engineer. Spent many years with France Telecom, Orange, working with third parties and delivering solutions. I now sit on the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee which is a scrutiny committee that holds the UK government to account in all those areas and have a keen interest in AI and quantum computing.
Hello, my name is Mariana Fel Hadjianidou. I'm an MP in the Hellenic Parliament. I specialize in social innovation and technology, and I have created 2 social enterprises, one called Coded Like a Girl, which actually tries to eliminate the gap in gender representation in STEM fields, and an online platform called Great Women. And we're actually discussing a lot on how there is a gap in new technologies, and I'm really happy to be here today with you.
Kalispira, guten Tag, and good afternoon. I'm Chris Holmes. I'm in the UK House of Lords. I've been in Parliament for 12 years, and I cover all areas around AI, blockchain, cyber, and digital assets and tokenization, with the golden threads of inclusion and innovation and talent and technology running right through all of that. I'm currently a member. I've been on select committees for my 12 years. I'm currently on the Communications and Digital Select Committee.
Thanks, everybody. So we have some prompts and some questions already here, but it'd be really good to have a bit of an interactive session. And so if people do have questions, just mark them down and we'll come to you soon. But one of the first things that I think we wanted to explore, and I think none of us can ignore the geopolitical realities that we live in, the rise of disinformation, misinformation. As parliamentarians, we absolutely are living in a period of time where trust in politicians and in institutions, especially in the UK, I mean, I'm assuming it's the same in many places, is at historic lows. Parliamentary oversight is incredibly important in building that trust back during this period of technological advancement. Parliamentary oversight often sounds strong on paper, but weak in practice. This is a technocratic question, but I'm sure we've got a great panel for this. So what does good oversight of artificial intelligence actually look like day to day? And does anybody have any examples of where it's going well? And I am very happy for any of the panel to put their hands up and go first. Martin, go for it.
Always the sucker to go first. Well, our select committee has been doing quite a long investigation into social media. We had, back in last summer, we had riots in a place called Southport, which were fueled by social media reports that were wrong. So we were looking at disinformation and misinformation in social media networks. Now, ironically, one of our number very recently had a deep fake video of themselves speaking, put up on Facebook, and this was where they were defecting to another party. And Facebook still to this day have not taken it down and will not actually acknowledge that it is anything wrong with it. But what we found in our investigation is that it's all down to the business models and the algorithms, the quote-unquote algorithms, which is a term that we use, the basic recommendation mechanisms that are used in all of the social media platforms. And we spoke to TikTok, we spoke to Twitter, X, we spoke to Facebook, and a few others. Those recommendation engines take all of your data, they feed it through a system with an AI engine, a neural network component right at the very middle of it, and they come back and feed you stuff that you are most likely to click on. And whether that's because you're angry or you're rage-fueled, or whatever the new word is, I can't remember what the rate...
I don't know, I'm too old for these things.
And this then generates more clicks, keeps people on their site. So their business model is directly there to actually fuel the misinformation and disinformation. Now, we went through and we created a long report which had a whole load of conclusions, and government agreed with every single one of our conclusions, but not one of our recommendations. So we can see it, but we're still not getting that message through to the government here. So the fact that one of our members has had this deepfake video put up there is real indication that we still have a problem here. Now, all of this is fueled by the AI engines that do it. But the reality is that none of it is new. We've seen this for a long time. And we had a debate in Westminster Hall in this House a few weeks ago about AI and safety with AI. Every single one of the harms that people talked about was not a new harm. Every single one of them was made easier and more voluminous and more accurate by people with less skill through use of AI, but it was not new. So my argument, and this is my personal argument, not the Select Committee's argument, is that you cannot regulate a technology. You couldn't regulate wheels. You can regulate cars, you can't regulate wheels. You can regulate use of a technology. You can regulate for the harms that are being done. And many of the things that we're looking at, we already have regulation to deal with those harms. We just have to be better at applying it, better at recognizing it, and better at dealing with it. So I think I've heard a lot today about how do we keep up with technologies. I think the answer to my way of thinking is you don't, because you can't. Because what we've got today isn't really artificial intelligence. In many ways, ChatGPT could be likened to a souped-up version of Motorola text prediction. It really does give you a pattern recognition combined with a large language model input, combined with improvements in natural language processing, combined with increases in power in processing, to give you a way of summarizing, projecting, delivering text, generative text, that actually is just like Motorola text prediction used to do on smartphones. So there's nothing new. It's actually Ecclesiastes, I was told yesterday. There's nothing new under the sun. And there is nothing new here in what they're doing. It's just being faster and faster and more complex. But we have to address and regulate the harms rather than technology. That's the point that I come back to.
We're not doing that yet in the UK, in your view.
Not sufficiently,
Cool.
no.
Venus?
So I think, as I said in my sort of introduction, I represent startups and scale-ups, and so by the very nature of the businesses that I work with, they are doing something novel that has never been attempted before. And so when I think about sort of, parliamentary oversight approaches that work for our sector specifically, the ones that come to mind are ones that are sort of high-level, principles-led, and really focus on sort of the outcomes and the desired outcomes rather than necessarily the sort of processes or the exact, technicalities of it. I think, as Martin said, most of this is not new, and we will have systems to deal with it. And so it's really about sort of meeting the new technology from where we are today. And I think this is an awful, awful thing to say in a room full of legislators, but sometimes it is best to sort of sit on our hands a little and see how things play out. I think, in the UK, sort of speaking from a UK perspective, the UK has actually lagged in adoption of previous technologies. So, for example, we sit at around 24th or 25th in the robotics density index. We are, slowly edging towards 70% of cloud adoption. And I feel like we are just in the foothills of this next revolution with artificial intelligence. And what we really want to see is actually, full adoption, full diffusion, full deployment. And so it's really important to not almost race ahead with legislation from where we are actually with the tech today. Therefore, I think one of the, I really, appreciate the UK government's approach on this, which is set out some high-level principles and then allow the regulators to look at the sort of verticals at which they sort of, where the rubber hits the road. And so we see that already starting to happen, but it's a much more precise way that puts the experts first and takes that sort of vertical approach, rather than perhaps what we've seen in the EU, which is trying this, sort of horizontal, one-size-fits-all approach that, the ink's not even dry yet, and they're already starting to have to, row back on. So that's a really sort of good example. Similarly, any sandboxing where you're able to test new novel technologies, new products, new services in a contained and secure environment, and really sort of monitor and evaluate in that way is also incredibly helpful to startups who sometimes need that sort of new infrastructure to be able to test their products.
Thanks, Venus. Federica, I'm going to maybe put you on the spot slightly because the UK has, maybe unhelpfully for Italy, taken a lot of your amazing AI talent. And I know that in our office for AI, we have some amazing Italian scientists and researchers that are here. But that you obviously have lots and lots of amazing AI scientists in Italy because some of the fantastic stuff going on in Italy and actually with the Vatican on AI and ethics is really interesting. So I'm just wondering, from an Italian perspective, what would you say to some of that?
Yeah, thank you. I will bring you here the Italian perspective, but from the point of view of a mathematician, of somebody who has a PhD in statistics, so sometimes it's not completely aligned, let's say, with all the discussions that sometimes we hear. Going back to your first question, by the way, that's something I would like to share with everyone here, is that not necessarily a law on AI is a good law on AI. And I think that on this topic, we should really refrain from just conveying a new law just to show that we did make a new law because this means to be a good parliamentarian, a good representative. This is not the case. And I think that EU case shows that not necessarily this is appreciated by the people, because after a lag of time, people will recognize whether this law is a useful one or just one that served the purpose of politicians to say that they did something. And to do something that is not necessary right now, it means to do something that can be not just useless, but harmful in order to develop all the competencies that we need. Yes, many Italian researchers are around the world, in UK a lot, it's true. In the States, my sister is, for example, in Stanford. I used to live abroad as well. And we have to accept the idea that countries are in competition somehow for the skills, and this was always the case. And we want to see this more specifically for AI, but this was always there. And so countries and government are now required to be more efficient than ever in order to retain good skills and good minds, and people who have a professionality can be served the purpose of the development of the country, because this ultimately would mean for the country to have a chance while competing with the others. But we also need to highlight the importance of cooperation in this. So the OSCE means Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and cooperation should be one of the pillars, together with competitions and the requirement of efficiency, of course. And cooperation means, of course, to create connections, as you said at the beginning, and also to exchange good practices, and remember every day that it would be better for all of us if we collaborate with the others. So competition is a second level than cooperation in order to achieve our goals.
Thank you very much. Maria Nefelli, welcome to you.
Hello. So Greece has done a great digital transformation the last years, especially due to COVID. It forced us to actually do a lot to act faster. I can say that our first point where we started discussing about oversight was when we created our cornerstone law in 2022 about blockchains, Internet of Things, and AI. But I believe that we have recently understood that we should do a mix of strategies when it comes to AI for Greece. For instance, for schools and students, we now did a collaboration with OpenAI, which is a private, actually, actor, in order to advance in schools the use of AI. But at the same time, we realized that our oversight must be more focused. That's why, for the first time, our parliament did a memorandum of cooperation with the University of Piraeus and created the first AI factory in Greece in order to create its own cloud services, research, and development, and also oversight for the Parliament. This is actually profound for Greece because for us, we are a small country, but AI has no borders, so we have to have the same mechanism as a bigger state in order to protect our citizens. We also focus a lot on kids and minors because we believe that after research that has been done, these are the first who actually enter into AI technology. So we are seeing if we're going to apply the Australian law of prohibiting social media, but until we arrive there, we have done the Kids Wallet, which is actually an application through an online platform that we have as a state that allows parents to actually intervene with what kids are watching and how kids interact with AI and other social media platforms. I believe that for us it is very important to educate all citizens of Greece, and as mentioned in the previous panel, awareness must be general in all public and not to a specific group of citizens.
Thank you very much. Lord Holmes?
Thank you. What do we need to do? As with everything, we need to human lead, because no matter how technologies are, we need to human lead on them, and by doing that, principles-based, outcomes-focused, inputs understood to some of those principles which can build that human approach and build human trust, having trust in there, trust and transparency, inclusion and innovation, interoperability and an international outlook, accountability, assurance and accessibility. Good principles, I'd argue, to base our approach to AI on, good principles for almost any approach to anything we do in this fundamentally human endeavour, which it will always be no matter how good the technology becomes. Probably worth killing a couple of myths at this time of the afternoon. You might not have been in Parliament long enough to know the building is infested with moths, so we have to do quite a lot of killing of moths, but we can kill a couple of myths this afternoon. Firstly, the myth that you can either have regulation or innovation, and that they are diametrically opposed. Complete nonsense. History, not least recent history, tells us not only that right-sized regulation is good for innovation, but that it's the only approach we should be taking. Plenty of bad regulation out there, we all know that, but that's bad regulation. That doesn't mean that regulation of itself is bad. If we look at, for example, the UK telco industry, look at a business like Vodafone. Vodafone is a consequence of a regulatory approach to telephony a good number of years ago. If you look at the FinTech regulatory sandbox of 2016, if you look at open banking, a deliberate willed regulatory intervention, right-sized regulation, good for innovation, good for investment, good for citizen, good for consumer, good for creative, but that is right-sized regulation. I believe that we should do more in this country and in all jurisdictions, and hence why I say we connect through interoperability and that international outlook. That's why I introduced my AI regulation bill in November 2023 to have a right-touch approach to legislation. The EU Act is just shy of 1,000 pages. I did my bill in just 9 clauses. You decide which you prefer. I've read both, so come to me for either. But the reality is, if we want consumers, investors, innovators to have a coherent, a consistent, a clear approach to AI in whichever domain they come across it, be that health, defence, financial services, then I believe we need a right-sized AI regulation bill, horizontally focused, to join the dots, to just do exactly what's required and no more. I'll go into it in a bit more detail later, but the most important clause of all in the bill is nothing to do with technology at all. It's the clause which is around public engagement. Because if we don't have that public discourse, that public debate around AI, and indeed all of these technologies, then what's the consequence? The consequence is that a certain group of people will have the knowledge, will have the means, and they will separate from the vast majority of our societies, our communities, who will be left behind if we haven't been able to enable people to ask and have the question answered, what is in this for me? Why should I care? How do I get involved? So the most critical thing for all of this, across our parliaments, across our legislatures, but across our wider society, a public debate, a public discourse, public engagement, the like of which we have never seen to date. And the great good fortune is, human-led, the technologies of themselves can assist with that human engagement and that human connection.
Thanks, Lord Holmes. Really appreciate that. And it was like you read the script, so you knew what was coming next. The next point is all around democratic accountability and public trust. And I think the point that Federica made around political pressure, being a recovering tech policy person, I suppose, and now a politician, the things that I thought I would spend my time on are not the things I spend my time on as a politician. There's an institute in the UK called the Ada Lovelace Institute that is pushing a lot of its polling at the moment that says the vast majority of the public want basically draconian restrictions on artificial intelligence. That's an interesting way of doing public policy, but I think how we do that, it demonstrates the issue that we have is that we are not bringing the public along with us in this. So what role do parliaments play that regulators alone cannot to build that trust? So what do we as parliamentarians or people working in that scope, how do we push that forward? Does anybody? Martin, you go first.
Thank you. I think one of the things we can do is clarify the terminology that we use. So the systems that we have today that claim to be AI are pretty much simple tools. They're things that you ask it to do something and it does what you ask it to do. What the general population think we have out there today is what's called general AI, which is that which can make its own decisions from a standing start. And we heard in earlier sessions about the idea of artificial consciousness. And that's what people fear is there happening today. They can be fooled by the flow of words that you can get out from ChatGPT, that it's actually having a conversation with you, but it's not really doing so. It's just parroting stuff. But just around the corner in a few years' time, we'll have those things that really will be able to have that apparent consciousness, whether it's real or not. That's when it gets to be a bit difficult. We've got to debunk some of the hype. We've got to actually be real about what is available today and how we control it in terms of the harms and the misuse that it may be put to. But we also have to prepare people for the idea of what's coming around the corner, which is the general AI system. And that is a whole new ball game. I mean, you might say that I was referring to earlier as Motorola text prediction. In relation to what we have today, general AI is Terminator. And that is the difference that we're looking at. Today, we need to regulate for what the tools can do. And that's what people do with those tools, and there's a person behind it. Quite how we go to that extra point, I don't know, but it's not real yet. So we have to actually downplay the capabilities. We have some very excellent tools that really help with productivity, help us do things, and do things in a fraction of time. I was struggling to write a bio for this session in 120 words, and I gave a long document into ChatGPT and said, summarize it in 120 words. And I read it, and it was absolutely brilliant. It's really, really good at that. What it's good at is pattern recognition and pulling things together. And we've got to make sure that we are clear about what technology can do today. And that's not what the technology firms will tell you. So what we can do as parliamentarians is shine light on the reality, which is why I'm sort of downplaying the capabilities, downplaying what we're talking about today a bit, because that's where I see it as being real. Now, we've then got to be prepared for what happens when somebody actually is capable of writing general AI, which is a whole new ballgame. So one of the things that is different about using a neural network to answer computer questions is that you have a non-deterministic system. A deterministic system is when you have a set of data, a known process, and you test it by saying, does it have the expected output? And you'll get the same answer every single time you run that test. That's how we test cars today. That's how we test products today. That's how we test all sorts of things. AI systems with neural networks at the heart of them give you probabilistic answers. So 9 times out of 10, it will correctly identify a picture of a cat. The 10th time, it'll say it's a tiger. You know, and it's not guaranteed to give you a consistent output. Hence this idea of hallucinations where it gets it wrong. That's something that we need to look at and need to prepare about because people don't expect that. So one of the things the population needs to learn quickly is how to sense check, how to distinguish between what is real and what is not real. The new skill for children in the latter half of the 21st century is going to be critical analysis. No longer do you need to learn the dates of the Battle of Hastings. Dr. Google will tell you that immediately. But is it right in telling you that it was yesterday because AI's had an hallucination? You have to apply your critical sense and check the outcome, the output of those systems.
Thanks, Martin. You're absolutely right about the whole thing about politicians being able to shine light on the reality, but I've had enough experience of politicians in the past 18 months to realise it's not always reality they shine a light on, so that's a bit of a concern of mine. But Maria Nefelli.
I believe that in order to build trust with citizens, we must show what effective or parliamentary oversight looks like and what we actually look for. I would focus that what we need to do is to focus on transparency, on auditability, on accountability, and on capacity. Because actually what citizens want to know is what systems are being used. And we cannot regulate what we cannot see. And if we don't demand that we see what systems are being used, we do not allow citizens, journalists, even authorities to monitor what is happening in these systems. Also about auditability. AI may seem like magic, but it is not. It's actually math, it's statistical predictions based on data, and data sometimes may be flawed. And when data is flawed, models drifts, and when model drifts, bias creeps in. So actually we need to know when this is happening and to detect it early before it undermines more our institutions. Also about accountability. If something bad happens, who is accountable for it? And in a democracy, you cannot outsource accountability. You cannot actually blame an actor, a private actor, because you are the institution. So I believe that if an algorithm denies access to a civilian or if a right is denied, we need to know who is responsible for that and who has to answer in the parliament or to other authorities. And last, I believe that citizens must know that Parliament have the capacity, the actual capacity, to exercise meaningful oversight. For instance, the Parliaments have expertise that can actually affect decision-making, to ask the hard question, to scrutinize implementation, so they can really trust that the oversight is done correctly.
Venus?
So I have a theory on this, which is I think actually when we talk about AI adoption, the public sector and state actors could go faster than even the private sector because of their ability to upskill, retrain folk, and reach into communities that perhaps otherwise are often, as Lord Holmes says, that the last to see sort of uptake. And so what I would love for governments and legislators to do is meet citizens and populations and where they are and engage them on sort of, showing them how AI can be transformative and build those sorts of efficiencies. So, for example, I'll take a UK example of GP surgery, so doctors. Here in the UK, when you go and see your doctor, you often have about 10 minutes with them. And at the moment, you'll go in and they will be sort of, they will barely look at you, very rarely make eye contact because they're sort of typing up notes. There are sort of startups now that are working on ambient voice technology, which allows a doctor to do what they're there to do, which is sort of speak directly to the patient, understand where they might,
We have a pilot in Weston-super-Mare.
Fantastic. I love to hear it. And essentially, it frees up the doctor to be able to engage on a human level with their patient and gives so much confidence to the patient that they're being heard, which is something that's often a complaint within our healthcare system, that they're just rushed through a process. And so actually seeing that sort of technology rolled out from government is important. And then what is Parliament's role in that? I think Parliament's role is there to be sort of, salespeople and also customer service, right? To first go out and engage with the public about this technology and ensure that there is sort of, an understanding of, as Martin says, where the technology is, where it isn't, do some of that myth busting, but also to legitimately raise concerns and act as that sort of customer service point where there are complaints that it's not working or not working for specific demographics. And I think, again, technology can help in that sort of public dialogue piece. Lord Holmes, if you haven't heard of a startup called Granola, it's a fantastic product which basically transcribes all of your meetings, issues summary notes, and can even sort of suggest actions off the fly. Seeing that, scale would allow parliamentarians to do far more outreach and speak to their citizens on a larger scale than ever possible. So, again, I think, the public sector rollout and adoption of artificial intelligence is so key to engendering trust, particularly if it comes through in those high trust environments like health, like education, like the judiciary, because there are guardrails that can be put in place and oversight that can be provided by Parliament that can help sort of, that reinforcement loop of sort of, trust and adoption.
Thanks, Venus. Federica.
Yes, if I remember your question correctly, is what parliaments can do, apart from making laws, of course. I think we should give definitely the feeling that we are in control somehow of the situation. I very much agree with this. I think that a feeling of control can be sometimes better given by, for example, establishing an observatory. So people need to know that we are observing and monitoring the phenomenon, because in case we are ready to make any decision that is required, even a new law, if this is what we need. However, to make laws when we don't really know now which law is good to do, it could be a boomerang, because then people don't trust the policymakers anymore, because they think that we are just creating new laws for the sake of creating it, but they don't really trust this. And another thing that we should do with AI in order, because it's very interesting, the survey that you mentioned. So people have a concern, a real one, and they want to be somehow be in a position that they don't have this big concern anymore. And what we can do, for example, to remember that AI is not magic. And so I don't know if we have the experts in the parliaments. Maybe we have not. But it's important to show that we are in strong and close connections with experts, that we do not make decisions without listening to the expert. And what do the experts say? The real ones. They say that AI does not produce knowledge. It produces, and I very much could relate to Martin Wrigley sentences, it produces plausible sentences that to us look as knowledge. And we are going from episteme to epistemia, from knowledge to delusion of having knowledge. And in order to be ready to combat this and to combat all the bad consequences of this, we actually need the experts. So we can delegate a part of our job to AI, but we still need in control of the matter. We still need the expert to check that the result from AI is a good one. And so, of course, we need to teach our students AI and media literacy and all of this, but also we still to remember to talk about critical spirit and all the things that we have been teaching and learning for centuries, because we will need those things in order to understand the result of an AI algorithm.
Thank you. It sounds very much like a book I have been reading, and I've given to Sarah as a recommendation, called The AI Mirror by Shannon Valor. I don't know if you've heard of her, but it's something really interesting. She's at the University of Edinburgh at the moment. Lord Holmes?
Yeah, I think we need to do what we always should be doing, that's to lead on this, to have absolutely all the voices in the mix, so citizens, experts, but experts advise, parliamentarians, ministers decide. That's absolutely critical, that we don't think that the answer is just to throw this over to experts. It's for all those voices to be in the mix. And as we've heard, the technology enables us at far greater pace and scale to get that full chorus of voices into the decision-making process. And probably let's squash myth number 2. Myth number 2, that it's not possible to legislate in time for these technologies. Well, it depends on the approach you take. If you take the approach that a lot of parliaments have always taken, well, certainly you can't. But I believe you can, and 2 recent examples from the UK Parliament, when I took the Electronic Trade Documents Bill, now Act, through Parliament, it's a very short statute, just a couple of clauses, done in pretty short time. Similarly, earlier this summer, I took the Property Digital Assets Bill through the Lords, couple of clauses, very short piece of legislation, very specific. So firstly, to legislate in a different way, to have it more focused and more specific. But here's the critical point. I believe you will always be in more tricky ground if you seek to take a prescriptive rather than principles-based approach to legislating. Because prescription is always unbelievably, beguilingly appealing. Because you think, if I can get everything down, I've got it, and we've got the perimeter, we've got it all set. But what you've done there is trapped yourself in that moment in time. Whereas if you take a principles-based approach and you have the flexibility, the agility, the adaptability in your legal system, and you enable development through precedent, through case law, through other developments, you give yourself a real opportunity to set the tone, that right touch regulatory approach, which can develop and go alongside. So it means you don't have to think, I wonder where this technology will be in 12 months, 12 years. That's irrelevant. I think it's part of the problem that a number of governments are going through at the moment. Certainly it's part of the difficulty with our current government, I gently suggest, that I think there's a belief that let it go for a bit, and then there'll be this point in time where we get to a plateau, we get to a point where we can breathe, we get to half time when the oranges come out and we can all have a think about it and then do the legislating, the regulating then. But as we all know, that time just isn't going to come. We have to have an approach which is agile, adaptable, flexible, and it's entirely possible to do. And we've got recent examples of, we've already heard about sandboxing as well. Very good approach to be able to do things at speed in an environment which doesn't compromise safety, doesn't import increased risk. If you structure the sandbox in the right way, a very dynamic and novel way to approach regulation. So in short, we do know how to do this, but we have to do it at scale in a different way to what the majority of parliaments go about the legislative approach of, here's a 300-clause bill, where the only thing you know about it by the time it goes through the final part of its parliamentary process, it will be a 410-section statute, and it doesn't have to be like that.
Thanks, Lord Holmes. I promised that there'd be time for questions, and we've got about 15 minutes for questions, but I noticed we're joined by the President of the Parliamentary Assembly. I didn't know whether you wanted to make any comment, or you don't have to, but...
No, I don't have to. Thank you so much. Sorry that I was not here from the beginning. I had a meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs for European Affairs, because you know that it is relevant to our Assembly what is being discussed these days about the Human Rights Convention. And then I had the honor to meet again with a friend, the Lord Speaker. So I didn't follow the meeting from the beginning, but I will ask my colleagues later. No, I don't want to ask any questions. I would like to give the floor to our colleagues who might use it even better than I could.
Thanks very much. So I am notoriously terrible at taking questions in an orderly fashion, but if we go to you first, because you were very, very quick.
Thank you. I have a question on potential regulation in the UK or lack thereof. But first, I just wanted to give credit where credit is due. I mean, I'm from civil society. EDRI advocated for the AI Act, and with all its flaws and things that we advocated for and didn't see, it's not a one-size-fits-all regulation, as it was said before, because it adopts, a layered, risk-based approach that we criticize for several reasons, but, it doesn't apply the same level of obligations to all AI systems. There are prohibitions, there are high risk, there are medium risk, there are low risk, etc. So that was just to dot the I's. But this is because I would wonder, when it comes to the UK, if I understood correctly, you said that you are thinking of regulating use of AI, only some uses in any case, which kind of leaves me perplexed about not looking at the whole life cycle of AI. When you think of, for example, the way AI is trained, and is trained, it implies the collection of data, the formation of data set, the classification, and we all agreed that we mentioned examples that data set may have poor quality data, or may be biased, or the data themselves may be sensitive and in some cases subject to obligation. So I would argue that as a minimum, even the phase of design of AI should be looked at. But then the second question is, do you think that the existing regulatory framework that exists in the UK is sufficient? I did hear you mention that we need to implement it better, but you don't think that somehow as a minimum, you would need to streamline, so to review the existing rules and see which ones could be better explained or tailored to clarify how they apply to the new AI system. So it's not about creating new laws, but clarifying which of the existing laws and principles. And when it comes to principles, I do agree that a principles-based approach offers flexibility, especially in cases of technologies that advance. We discussed this before in other sessions as well. But we also discussed that the UK has signed and is going to ratify potentially the Council of Europe Framework Convention, which already establishes a set of principles. And it says that those principles, the states are free to operationalize them the way they see fit, either with existing legislation or with new one. So now you are talking about introducing a new set of principles, or maybe abiding to the ones already of the convention, because this is like a matryoshka of principles that at some point will have to be made into concrete actions. So I would be curious to understand, with all the due flexibility, how will they be operationalized in practice? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, my 18 months experience as a policymaker and a parliamentarian, I've definitely noticed that siloed mentality does actually happen, and we can have agreements over here and agreements over here that don't 100% correlate. So it's an important challenge. I'm going to take a few questions. So Joanna, and then this gentleman here. Do you want to go?
Something about that seat. I have a question now from Martin Wrigley, but he's here, which is great. I really very much appreciate what you said before, and it's really frustrating sometimes that it isn't recognized more, that these are known harms with known consequences, with laws already there that aren't always enforced. And what we saw with Uber and Airbnb, where we didn't just apply the obvious nearest law and then have the companies come to us and legislate for refinement rather than just leaving this free-for-all. However, my concern is that at some point, as we talked about, humans have a scale of life that we can handle. And actually, this is kind of a question also to Venus. What I've heard just recently in Hong Kong is people panicking about the fact that, yes, they can write code now in a day, but then 2 days later, Microsoft writes the same code. And so they don't have enough time to actually get a business built up. So my argument here is that even if it's the same harms we've always seen, Microsoft's been doing that since the 80s, right? But it's the fact of the change of pace might make it into a qualitative difference that does require some kind of legislation. And yet, what you said at the end about AGI, I feel the other way around. Actually, this is just a qualitative shift, and if we do get on top of holding people to account for the current software they're producing, then I think we can continue to control the systems that they produce as long as we have a way to control the government, the organizations that are producing them.
Thank you. And
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm Charles Colville. I'm on the House of Lords Communications and Digital Committee with Chris Holmes over there. I'm interested in what Chris Holmes said about we should legislate for principles, following up on what Francesca said. There are already a whole lot of established principles out there. What we kept being told when we were debating the Online Safety Act in this country was that unless you actually pinned down the specifics of the law, the tech companies, lawyers, were going to say, is it on the face of the bill? Is it in the law? And if it's not, then we don't have to pay attention to it. Isn't the problem that we're dealing with enormous, sophisticated companies whose sole purpose is to make as much money as possible, to engage users as much as they possibly can? And if we're going to have any kind of regulation that is going to push back on that, or any kind of law that's going to push back on that, we have got to be very, very specific about what our requirements are going to be if we're going to have any effect at all. We can pass as many laws as we want, but if they don't work, then there's no point in doing it.
Thank you. I mean, there's something, so I'm a member of the Business and Trade Select Committee, and the last report that we published was on economic security, and it detailed the huge change in the past 10 years and that will be in the next 10 years of the private sector ownership of public risk and the culture change that needs to happen within the private sector to be able to accommodate the huge responsibilities that are coming with that for the public. So there's definitely something in that. Anyway, this is not my show. Who would like to come in on any of that? Venus?
Lord Colville, that was music to my ears when you said, passing a law is not enough, it needs to be meaningful and actionable. I think often, legislators go, something must be done, okay, we'll pass the nearest law that we have at our fingertips, and that's where the story seems to end, and actually, how that plays out is then really impactful. And if we don't see that sort of cycle all the way through from sort of legislation going onto the statute book and then meaningful change happening, all we're doing is eroding the trust in the legislation up front. So I think that is hugely important. I think it's also important to remind ourselves of the fact that we are talking about a technology that is very mobile, it is borderless, and so whilst we can have conversations around sort of digital sovereignty and that sort of, the buzzword of the day, and what bits of the AI stack do we seek to control and have sovereign capabilities in, we have to recognise and sort of accept that at the heart of that is talent. And often the founders that I speak to are moving to more permissive regimes and building their companies in regimes that allow them the space to do that. If we really want to build sort of sovereign capabilities and see European unicorns that can serve European populations develop with European values at their heart, then we need to make sure that we get that right-sized policy, as Lord Holmes talked about. So for me, to answer the sort of first question of, are you saying that we don't need more regulation? I would say, no, we're okay as we are, and I would like to see sort of, politicians giving stronger steers to regulators about how to enforce and engage. with sort of the new issues as they come up. But I wouldn't necessarily want to see sort of us adding to the statute book for, just to be able to sort of stand up and say we've done something and address this issue. I think that also ties into the fact that, frankly, our regulators, both here in the UK but across the EU as well, don't necessarily have that capacity. They don't have the budgets necessary to have to build the sort of talent in-house, nor are they able or willing to draw from the expertise that sort of lies within pools near them, like academia, etc. And so I think if we are going to hand that power to regulators, we also need to be able to upskill them and give them the budgets necessary to do this work properly.
Resource the regulators. Yeah. Anybody else want to come in on that?
Yeah.
Martin? Yeah. Oh, Lord Holmes first and then Martin.
You sure? I think to a number of the points that have been raised, should we seek to have a framework, legislative and regulatory framework, which covers more than outcome? Yes, of course we should, and it needs to cover all of the life cycle, hence principles-based, outcomes-focused, inputs understood. So then you cover all of it. We absolutely need to. Is the UK approach currently sufficient? No, I'd suggest it's chronically insufficient, and that's part of the problem why we're not getting the development, we're not getting the investment, we're not getting something which really feels like, looks like, and is a UK approach to this whole question of AI, and indeed other allied and fabulous combination technologies, because, as I said, you can do right-sized regulation. If we do nothing, then not only is it suboptimal, but you've got huge areas where there's no regulation at all. So it's not even about trying to apply what's already there. There are huge areas where there's no regulation and no competent regulator when it comes to AI's impact in certain areas. Now, I don't think anybody would want that. To Charles's point, which is very well made, I think it comes back to enforcing our approach to jurisprudence and statutory interpretation, because what we're against at the moment is very much an argument on one side which seeks to take a literalist approach to statutory interpretation. And that was the approach in the UK well over half a century, almost a century ago. That was the approach. But then, smartly, we and other jurisdictions looked at a purposive approach to how the judiciary and indeed others interpret statute. And if you take a purposive married up with a principles-based approach, I think you get the right outcome, and it gives you more than enough of the sword and the shield to defend against even the slickest lawyers who seek to try and suggest that it's either there or it isn't there. So very much that sense of holding a real banner and ensuring that everybody takes that purposive approach to statutory interpretation when these things are challenged. Because, as you know, Charles, when you look at all of the work that we did on the Online Safety Bill Now Act, huge amount of work, and there's so much good in there, but already there are huge elements that aren't covered by it, by government's own admission. And it's because in that process, not enough was allowed into that sense of principle and purposiveness, or proposition, if that's a word. I don't think it is, but let me tell you it is now. You heard today, proposition for the first time. Hashtag get it on your socials.
Thanks very much. Just to come to the questions I think that were addressed to me in terms of the idea that Microsoft can rewrite bits of code very quickly. Yeah, they'll do it. That just means that the basic business model that those guys are doing is no longer sustainable. It's like trying to pretend you can create a business out of nothing. They need to put more into it that can't easily be copied. We come back to copyright. If they've got something that is new and innovative and does something better and cleverer, and it can't easily be replicated, then software is protected by copyright, nothing more. And that comes back to the same thing in terms of training these machines, because we are looking at AI engines, neural networks that are being trained with, for example, a whole set of theses written by past students. If you had a new student read all those theses and then regurgitate it, all the same words in not necessarily the same order, but the same ideas just pulled together, without citing those previous theses, then they'd be held up on it. So that, again, comes back to copyright, it comes back to acknowledgement, it comes back to transparency. And transparency is what will win out in all of these situations, rather than trying to control how they develop it. Because that is a hiding to nothing, to try to control all the minute details of that. It'll never work.
Thanks, Martin. And to save Ben's sanity at the back, I think we're going to have to wrap up. I know that we had one more question just here next to Sarah. Did you want to ask your question? And then we can try and whip it through it.
So, Mike, because there's been so much talk about transparency, one way of achieving that is to have, certainly in the public sector, a mandatory algorithmic transparency record. Because we've talked about kind of concepts but not practical measures. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've talked about putting responsibility at the end point of use, but that leaves out the whole chain of responsibility up to the point of use. And what it essentially does in public sector is shift the burden for paying out when things go wrong onto the taxpayer. And so the question is really, why should the taxpayer fund risk, private company or corporate risk?
Okay, we've literally got a minute. So does anybody want to jump in there with... Go on, Martin. I can see you twitching.
Always. So responsibility is how it's used, but that doesn't mean if you make a dangerous car, when somebody crashes it, the maker of the car and the driver are both liable, because the car was inherently dangerous and the driver was using it recklessly.
One thing I'd say to that, set the technology to solve for some of the issues raised by the technology.
Right, Ben, that's 49 minutes past. I think we've done all right. Thank you, everybody. Sorry we haven't got through everything. I could continue to chat, but I know that you've all been sat here most of the day, so enjoy Speaker's House. It looks glorious with the Christmas decorations, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Hi all, if I can just quickly get your attention. We have to be out of this room in 10 minutes because the Labour Party have their weekly meeting here. So all your belongings, if you can head